Hi Bangs class. I wanted to make this quick video to kind of walk you through what we're doing this week. Your essay prompt for your first real legit essay, it's a descriptive essay, will be due October 4th, but we're going to write the introduction to that essay this week. The prompt is here. You're basically describing 2020 through a series of 3 significant events that happened this year. So you need to lay all that out in your introduction. This is the prompt for the entire essay. Your prompt is to write an essay describing the year 2020, detailing 3 major events that shaped and defined this year. It's been a heck of a year. We're still in it, but a lot has happened, enough for you to write about. Some of these events include, but are certainly not limited to, COVID-19, the economic recession, Black Lives Matter protests, the 2020 presidential election, WAP by Cardi B. I just read what is the most obscene song to ever make #1 on the Billboard charts, which in itself made history. The death of Kobe Bryant happened this year, sadly, tragically. They're historic. West Coast wildfires, death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. If you follow the Supreme Court or politics, that was a big deal. And then, although this isn't really a legitimate news source, the New York Post, I verified this news article, that they made a list of major 2020 events to date that you could also pick from. I mean, anything really that was major from the world of sports or news or politics or pop culture. Anything that sort of shaped and defined 2020, you are allowed to write about 3 of those things. You'll have to pick 3. For this essay, we're going to make sure it's formatted in MLA format, double-spaced, and we'll go over MLA next week. Your sources, you'll need 3 separate sources for each topic that you write about. You may have more than 3, but you have to have at least 3 sources. It's going to be 2 full pages. That's not a whole lot. It's double-spaced. And just make sure you don't go over 2 pages. Or, write 1 page. That's unacceptable as well. Your voice should be academic, formal, objective, and third person. So no first-person pronouns such as I, me, we, etc. This has to be written from a third-person, objective, formal point of view. And then, like I said, the due date's October 4th. And this week, we're going to write the introduction. That's what's due at the end of the week or on Sunday. So let's look at what goes into introductions. Most of you probably know that introductions contain 3 things: a hook, background information, and a thesis statement. But what do these 3 things combine to do in an introduction? Well, it's a roadmap for your entire essay, and it sets the tone of an essay. I think this is something that's often overlooked, but however you feel about the subject will come across in your tone, and you need to establish that in paragraph 1, if there is a specific tone. This is more of for an argument paper or a position paper, but I would argue that descriptive essays can also have a tone, and if you decide to go with one, that needs to be present from paragraph 1. You need to capture the reader's attention and engage them with an interesting hook. You need to provide background information, and then finally establish the focus and purpose of your essay with a thesis statement. So as mentioned earlier, an introduction is 3 things that go into 1 paragraph: a hook, some background information about your topic, and then your thesis statement. And let's look what those individual things include. A hook, you'll have to Google something, and I'm letting you use the open internet for this hook just because I want you to learn about hooks. I don't care so much that it comes from the internet databases where you have to get your sources from, and we'll talk about that next week. A hook is a surprising fact or statistic. It could be a quote, it could be a brief, interesting anecdote, which is like a short story related to the topic that you're writing about. As long as it's eye-catching and interesting, you're good. And it's just a sentence or 2. But engage the reader, hook them, reel them in, make them want to keep reading your essay. Avoid these things when trying to write a hook. Avoid cliches and generalizations. Please don't open your essay with a definition. That's not going to engage or interest anybody. Then you also want to avoid sweeping claims that use words like always and everywhere, because nothing is ever always or everywhere. And you also want to avoid opening your essay with a hook that's a question. I know when you're prepping for the STAR test, which isn't that far in history for you guys, your instructors or your teachers might have told you to open with a rhetorical question, and that's fine for a STAR essay, but this is college, and avoid questions in your opening statement. After the hook, you provide context and background information, and this could be historic or geographical or social context. It could be really anything that kind of grounds the reader in enough information to make sense of the rest of your essay. You'd also want to define any unfamiliar terms and include, if there's any debates or theories or research happening on this topic, you'd want to include that as well, or just touch on it in the intro. The context and background information portion of the introduction is about 3 to 4 sentences. And this information should be encompassing of the entire essay. But don't get into the weeds. That's for the actual body of the essays. That's when you get into the nitty-gritty detail. In the introduction, you're kind of just skimming over what this essay will be about. So here's an example of an introduction. If you want to pause this video, have a look at this. We've got our hook in red, our background in blue, and the thesis statement in green. What makes this a hook is that it's a statistic or a fact. Star Wars Episode 4 grossed $775 million in the 1970s, making one of the most successful films of all time. That's a lot of money today. In the 70s, it was an exorbitant amount. So that's interesting. That's eye-catching. That's the type of thing you'd want to Google for your essay to use as your hook. And again, it's just a sentence. This Patterson 25 right here is the citation for this source. And we'll talk about citations next week. In blue, we have some background information about Star Wars, how it changed the narrative and aesthetic style of many Hollywood films that came after it, and how it had evolved from the very first film, Sneeze, which was made in 1894. So we have some historic background information about this topic, about Star Wars. And then finally, our thesis statement: Star Wars connects to and reshapes cinema history most prominently in 3 ways: narrative and cinematic style, genre, and auteur theory. Now we've got the main idea of the essay condensed down to 1 sentence. And according to this thesis statement, the 3 body paragraphs of the essay will focus on Star Wars narrative and cinematic style, genre, and the auteur theory behind Star Wars. I'm not sure what that is. Someone wrote this for a film class. But that's a good example to show you, because it just goes to show that all college essays basically follow this same format, at least as far as introductions are concerned. Grab the reader's attention, give them adequate background information, and then a solid thesis statement. And now we'll talk a little bit more about what goes into a thesis statement. So that's going to be module, or this third thing under the module this week. What I want you to focus on, there's a whole PowerPoint that you can look at as well. But your thesis statement specifically needs to include these 3 things: a specific topic, which is 2020, a point that you want to make about the topic. 2020 is an eventful year. 2020 is unforgettable. Whatever that point is, think of a point that you want to make in this essay about the topic 2020. And then also include in this statement 3 points of discussion that you will go on to write about in the essay. In this case, that will be 3 of the events that took place this year that help shape and define the year. So if we go down here, we can look at an example of a thesis statement. Now, this is a little bit more sophisticated than what you guys are doing for this essay, but this thesis says, although federal budgets are stretched thin due to the COVID-19 pandemic, at least 25% of the federal budget should be spent on helping upgrade businesses to clean technologies, researching renewable energy sources, and planting more trees in order to control or eliminate pollution. So this is, you guys are writing this part, at least today. We're not going to worry about a qualifying statement. But you could just take this part here and make that a thesis statement. And the topic is the federal budget. And the point they're making is that 25% of it should be spent on the environment. And then the three topics of discussion within the essay will be how that money could be used to help businesses create clean technologies, research renewable energy sources, and plant more trees. So again, make sure your thesis statement is achieving these three things, that you're laying out what the essay is about, 2020, that you're making a point about it, and that you have three topics of discussion that you will go on to write about in the body of the essay. After you've written your introduction, before you turn it in, I want you to go ahead and click on the assignment where you turn it in and look at this rubric here and grade your own introduction against this rubric. So I lay it all out for you. Your hook, is it engaging? Is it relevant to the subject matter? That's going to be 25 points. Background and context. Does this introduction contain relevant background information without getting into the weeds, but it sets up what the reader will be reading about in the essay? That's worth 25 points. Your thesis statement, which is arguably the most important sentence in your entire essay, is worth 35 points. So make sure you're doing all of this in the description here. And then finally, style and mechanics. That's things like grammar, punctuation, making sure you don't write in first person or second person, no you or yours in this essay, and that you use effective transitions. So I think a big trap for beginning composition writers is they'll have a hook, and then they'll have their background information, and then they'll have their thesis statement, and it almost reads like three separate paragraphs. This thing needs to flow together, so make sure that your hook flows into your background information, and your background information flows into your thesis statement. And all of that is worth 15 points. So grades have been easy so far, but when we get to the actual essays, I grade according to a rubric, and it becomes a little bit harder to earn that A or B. So make sure you have all the tools you need to get an A here. Just make sure you're doing these four things. If you guys have any questions, email me. I'll be happy to set up a Zoom appointment or just answer the email. However I can best help you, let me know, and I'll be happy to do that. Thanks, and happy writing. Again, only the introduction is due by Sunday, roughly 5 to 7 sentences.